My name is Allie Pons, and I run the Wildlife Rehab Center that's right next to the Education Center at Montana Wild. So we do a lot of partnering just across the street with providing programs and things like that. But the main reason that the rehab center is there is actually to take care of wildlife that's brought in with injuries or that the public finds, sometimes suspected orphans, sometimes true orphans and things like that. We do have an intake policy, so we are restricted in what we can help and recover. Our main species are birds, and then we are also allowed to take in some mammal species, the main one being black bear and grizzly bear cubs, as well as most cat species. Everything else is, as far as mammals goes, is kind of out of our realm of being able to take care of, just because we aren't set up for it, as well as we're looking at, diseases and, possible transmission there. So a lot of our canid species, they're also rabies vectors. And so that's something that we look at. With the ungulates, they tend to not do very well in a rehab setting unless they're allowed to be in herds, and we aren't set up for that either. And we also now have, CWD, which has been on everybody's radar this last hunting season. That's a concern too, because then you could be getting different populations of ungulates mixed together in a rehab setting, and who knows what you're spreading that way.
Can I break in?
Yes, of course.
I forgot to mention at the beginning that anyone can break in with questions at any point. Allie already said that was great. And you use the term ungulates. I think that's animals that chew their cud. Is that?
Yeah, so they have a 4-chambered stomach,
Okay.
but one of the main ways that they're known to be ungulates is actually the hoofs.
Okay.
So yeah, so they're a hoofed species.
And CWD.
Yeah, that is going to be chronic wasting disease. And so that, I can get into that a little bit, but it's a really interesting one that is caused by these inert things called prions. They're actually not living at all. And they go through a really strange life cycle. And when they end up affecting an animal, it's actually to their brain tissue. And that's why you get this, they can sometimes be called like whirling disease, chronic wasting disease. Those are all types of prion diseases, and it's affects the brain matter, and you end up getting weird behaviors in these animals, and that's one of the ways they pick up on it and figure out what it's all about. And like I said, if anybody has questions on that, I'm not an expert, but I can go into it in more detail, but it's something that has been raised. Yeah, go ahead. You're on mute. I can't hear you.
Okay. In the paper, was that this morning, talked about populations of rabbits in the state now being threatened by a virulent disease, and what
that's
category
actually,
is that? Does that?
Yeah, so that is something that has recently come about this last year in 2020, and we just had the first few cases actually show up in Montana, so rabbits are something that we aren't allowed to treat because they aren't a species of concern. There isn't really any, what do I want to say, restrictions on them either. So, it's not something that we're adding to or helping with a population by treating those. But we now have to be really careful if somebody does bring us a rabbit, that we're checking and making sure that we send it off to the lab if it appears to be ill and not something where it's a traumatic injury or something like that, that we're sending it off to the lab, because we really want to keep track of this new hemorrhagic fever disease that's coming up in rabbits. It's apparently very infectious, mostly in wild populations, but they have found it in domestic rabbits as well. And I know one concern is for our pika population, because they technically belong in the rabbit family. So it's something that we're really trying to keep track of. And they put an alert out to say, if you've come across an ill feral rabbit, to please send it into the lab and make sure that it's tested for that disease.
And what species can that disease transfer to other than pikas?
So far, it's just lagomorphs, which is that sort of family of mammals. And that for us right now means just our wild rabbit populations, domestic rabbits, as well as the pikas.
Okay,
Yes.
so
So
somebody-
right now it's pretty contained in that, and they may find it moving across species, but
Yeah.
so far it's pretty contained.
Excuse me, doesn't the rabbit have that fever come around about every 10, 12 years? There's a cyclic
Yeah.
sickness, and it affects the coyotes and everything else because they starve to death and stuff, don't they?
Right. So that's one of the concerns too, is if we lose our rabbit population, then that affects everything kind of up the food chain from that. I don't know if it is this specific hemorrhagic fever. If it's a different strain, I would have to look into that. But I know that everybody's pretty concerned about this one. So it certainly does affect much farther than just the rabbits themselves. But at this point, we don't see any other mammals or, families of mammals getting that specific.
Are we going to classify it as a pandemic then, or?
Well, we're going to classify this as a rabbit trail.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Yeah, so we are taking extra precautions with rabbits and things like that now, that has shown up in our state. But squirrels, rabbits, small mammals typically is not something that we treat, especially when it's a little counterintuitive. We have a lot of raptor species here, and that's their food. So if we get something in where it's not diseased and it's just a traumatic injury or something like that, we'd like to not have to just throw it away. If we can, we will recycle it into our food chain here. Yeah. So of course, some people have been very attached to their squirrels that they've been taken care of, and they understand that, something's happened and they do have to be humanely put down. And if somebody requests that we don't use them as food, I, of course, abide by that too. So we do take in people's sentimentalities there. But yeah, if you would like, I'll show you our guests, because they are some of our ambassador species here at the rehab center. And so this first one, I'll tip the screen a little bit and you can see better. If anybody wants to kind of shout out, if you can actually tell what we've got here, because I've heard we've got some birders on.
And then a peregrine falcon.
It is a falcon, but it is the smallest falcon species we have here in the state. So this is our American kestrel. And you can tell that it's a male, you can kind of see the blue on the wings here, which the females don't have. And he also has spotting on the chest rather than the stripes that the females have in coloration for their chest. So
I've never noticed the head markings that dark before on it, and pronounced, I guess I should say, on it.
Are you talking about his eyeliner there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is one of the things that is typical for a falcon species to have. They've got those eye stripes because unlike the other hawks, they don't have good coverage over their eyes because they're trying to be as aerodynamic as possible. So they don't have those extended ridges, which means that they're more affected by the light. So it kind of takes away that glare by having that dark stripe. And that's one of the things you can tell that it's.
Yeah. Now that looks more like one right now than what it did before and stuff on it.
It might be the viewing there is better.
Yeah, that's in my eyes too, I guess, on it.
So this is Spike. We do name them in this purpose just because we have to identify which kestrel it is. But typically when we're giving programs, we just say this is our American kestrel. But back in the rehab center, his name is Spike. And one of the reasons he got that name is he was found on the railroad tracks. So we kind of called him Railroad Spike there. And he's with us as a permanent because he had frostbite to both wingtips that required amputation. So one of the things that we have to go by are the federal regulations for keeping a wildlife species. And for birds, they can't have amputations above the wrist. So we really lucked out with his injuries here in that they were just at that wrist point. And so we were able to amputate and still maintain him as an ambassador bird. He's got a wonderful personality for it. He's very relaxed. He's very people oriented. He likes to kind of show off. He's doing his little head bob here. And we're able to show him off and have him teach the public about his species and the habitat needs and kind of what you can do to help kestrels, like building the kestrel boxes and things like that. And so that's a part of what we do at the rehab center is teach the public, as well as taking care of birds who come in with injuries like his. And then I can swing it. And we've got our other guest today. And let me pull this a little bit closer. So any guesses for this little guy? And believe it or not, he is the second smallest owl species that we have.
Is this the one you talked about last time, Corey?
It might be. I can't remember now. I think I did talk about it. Yep.
Did you?
Remember what it was?
Nope.
So this is our saw-whet owl, and they get their name from the sound that they make. And he looks like he's about to bail off his perch. You settle in there. They make a sound that sounds similar to the whetting of a saw. And so that's how they got their name. Oh, and he's gonna hop down and hop back up. And so you can see he's flighted enough to get off of his perch, but he has a wing injury as well. It didn't require amputation, but you can see that there's a droop on the side that's closest to you. So he has also become a permanent because he's not able to be released. And has a really good personality for programs as well, and is pretty much just a charmer, being as cute as he is. I always say with our owls, their attitude increases as their size decreases. So this is one of the toughest birds that we have back there. If you go for attitude per square inch of bird, these guys are seen, grabbing at woodpeckers or even birds up to 3 times their size. So that was our little saw-whet owl. And
I have a question about the kestrel. How much longer were its wings before you amputated?
okay, so we can talk a little bit about the anatomy here, and I'm going to kind of stand up or sit up here so that you can see my arm fully. So the way the wing sits here is you have their shoulder joint, you have their elbow down at the point, and then their wrist here, and then they have only 3 digits at the end until they hit their wrist joint. So unlike us with our 5 fingers, they only have the 3, and that's where their primary feathers come off of. So he's only missing from here forward. So it's a lot of his primary flight feathers that are missing, which is why, he really can't fly very much. He can kind of hover a little bit, but his flight is very limited, just because he doesn't have any of those primary feathers that you see on most birds. And people, when you look at him straight on, it's really hard to tell because everything else is tucked up nicely and in alignment the way it should be. And it's when he extends that you notice it's just very shortened and blunt at that point. And you don't get those very nice long tapering feathers at the end. Yeah. So
What's the saw-whet owl's name?
the saw-whet owl is Charlo. We had a pair of them. One was Pablo and one was Charlo. Charlo came from Pablo and Pablo came from Charlo, Montana. I don't I don't know where that got mixed up in our naming process, but unfortunately Pablo's no longer with us, and we just have have Charlo here now, but yeah, that a lot of times, you know, I can speak to Spike and the frostbite and his injuries there. Charlo is kind of a mystery, right? So a lot of times people bring us an animal, and unlike at the vet clinic, you know, where you're taking your pets, you have an idea of what happened to them. We have absolutely no idea 95% of the time what's going on with these animals when they come into us. So my job is to, one, play detective and kind of look at everything that the injuries or the illnesses are telling me and kind of go through diagnostics to sort of narrow it down to what I can fix, and without the help of really any background information. And then obviously I have to do my best to treat the patients. We do have veterinarians that we consult with and can get x-rays taken. We can send blood work off to labs and try and get all those diagnostic findings to narrow down what's happening with an animal that comes in. But it's harder than, I feel like veterinarians have a very hard time compared to human doctors because their patients can't speak. Ours gets up an extra layer just because we don't get any history as well. So.
Who does the surgeries?
So surgeries are done here in town by a doctor named Lucas Tomey at Apex. He's been working with us for many years now, and he'll do orthopedic surgeries on the birds. Most of the time, that's the furthest we'll get as far as surgeries go. Sometimes if we have a young orphan, that mammal that's going to be headed to a zoo or something like that, we'll have them spayed ahead of time if that's something that the zoo wants. So we can have them altered that way. But most of the time it's going to be an orthopedic surgery or something like that for the birds typically. Yeah. So. Do we have any other questions that have come up? I'm sort of hoping to hear from you guys. Anything that you're curious about or what we do back there or other treatments?
I take it you don't allow people to come in and observe the animals that you have on?
No, the only ones that do go out and meet the public are our ambassador birds. And those are because we have trained them to be on the glove and meet people. Wild animals are so stressed out because they see us as predators, no matter if they are a top predator themselves. Like even the bears are made nervous by our presence, especially for our black bears. That's a good thing because we plan on releasing those orphans. So we want them to be afraid of humans. But because of that stress, any added observation, any added attention from the public or, people just walking by their enclosures can really make it difficult for them to heal, because that stress is a stress also on their immune system. It prohibits healing. It prohibits, normal metabolism. All of those other hormones that get released with stress really make the animals decline. So as limited as we can make their exposure to humans, we do.
Yeah, that's, I understand that and stuff on there. I know when I used to take the kids on over here when you were over on Custer, and I donated because they said they were going to put up soundproof and one-way mirror or one-way glass and stuff so that the kids could still see it. And the first thing when you got built over there was that nobody was allowed there. And the money that was donated didn't go for the
oh, I'm sorry.
Do you ever do live feeds?
We have done a few, not live feeds, but we have done a few recordings of treatments. Corey's been a part of that, where she'll come over and she'll video an exam of a bird, or when we have interesting cases, she'll come over and kind of film things. It's one of the things that we've talked about is actually doing more, especially now that everything is virtual, is being able to show the public more of what's happening behind the scenes in a safe manner for those animals.
That really is a good idea, is to have, cameras that, the public could view what's out there and stuff on it, the larger mammals also, along with what you're doing.
At one point, we did have a camera in one of the bear pens, and it was fed into the video system at Montana Wild. Then I don't know if it was because of the bear or messing with the camera, but unfortunately it's not functioning right now. So, but we do have that ability once we can get it up and running. I don't know if Corey, you look like you have something to say.
Yeah, well, I can touch a little bit on some of this. First of all, yeah, one good thing that came out of COVID is we're definitely learning more virtual stuff, more video. And so, we're going to do like a live feed of an owl release later next week, or things like that. And then also just to touch on what Dave was saying about the bird enclosures, believe it or not, that project is still in progress. State government, you have to jump through 1 million hoops to get anything done. And so we have this huge, I don't know if Allie was going to touch on it a little bit, but we are working towards those new enclosures that people will be able to view the birds. We're making huge strides now. But Allie, sounds like you were going to touch on it more. So.
Well, so yeah, I think what Dave was talking about was actually before the move to where we're located at now, in a separate fundraising.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we do is
20 or 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It doesn't take quite that long.
I mean,
believe it or not, it takes close to that long.
Yeah,
but...
I know. I work for the feds, and I think it was even longer.
Yeah. So, but we do have an exciting build that we're looking to start in 2022. And what it will provide is not for our rehabilitation animals, but it will provide more viewing of our ambassador birds. So it's going to be an entire walkway where they have enclosures where you can see them from the walkway as you go through, and it won't just be when the volunteers are taking them outside of the gate and doing programs and doing their twice daily walks. It'll just be 365 days a year you can come and see these guys kind of on display. And so that's something that we're really excited to be able to provide, is this more interactive and better viewing of the birds that we do have on hand as permanent residents. I think they're pretty amazing, and I think a lot of people appreciate when we go out and talk to them about the birds, and so it's just a nice way to be able to have them shown. Yeah,
that sounds neat. It really does, and stuff on there. Looking forward to it.
Oh, good. Yeah, and I hope at some point we can get that, more behind the scenes videos up and running. It's always, for me, I feel like I'm kind of the killjoy sometimes, because I am thinking on behalf of the animal more so than maybe I should. And so I tend to always be like, oh, I want to minimize the stress, and I don't want a camera in their face, or that kind of thing. But there is so much that the public and everybody can learn from this. And in terms of taking care of, the animals that we see in the wild too, just learning those types of things that you can't always learn unless you're in that behind the scenes context. So I think, Corey and everybody else is really good at balancing me out and saying like, no, this is really cool and we need to see this, and kind of getting me out of my head a little bit. And
I know from personal experience taking the kids over there that, 3, 4, 5 years old and on up, they have a lot more appreciation for the wildlife, I feel anyway, and have kept it on up into their adulthood.
And I can speak to that too, because I remember I think I was 11 and actually going over to the Custer facility and wanting to volunteer, and they took me back behind the doors, and there was a baby moose that somebody was feeding, and they let me feed it. And I think it probably shaped me to where I'm at today, you know? So those experiences they have a tremendous impact, especially when you're a child, and can really carry through those desires to, you know, take care of the wildlife and be sort of their little environmental path for somebody.
One of the neatest things that happened was they had had a possum turned into them from someplace at one of the turnoffs, the rest areas, just this side of Billings.
Mm-hmm.
And they had it on out, and we got to pet it.
Oh,
I mean, they were going to turn it loose or something, or not loose, but they were going to send it someplace because, you know, it wasn't native or anything on it. But
right.
I couldn't believe how soft that thing was. I mean, that's going to be one of the highlights, and you know, an old timer and stuff on there that
Yeah.
really had never seen one that close, and it was just so docile and stuff. Really neat.
Yeah. And so we, you know, one of the perks, especially for the volunteers, is when we do get a mammal species in that's going to be placed at a zoo. So the kittens that come in, or the grizzly bears that we had gotten last spring, they need the interaction, right? They need to be able to handle public viewing and everything like that. So the volunteers, for once, get the opportunity to actually, you know, work with, train and help make them into a good zoo animal. And because so many of our animals are supposed to be released to the wild, and we don't want to have that interaction, it's a special treat for them when something like that does come in. So that's probably the same case as that possum, where, you know, the more handling and the more interaction, the better.
Yeah, well, they figured well, the thought was that it had crawled up into a vehicle and traveled from down south someplace, somebody traveling through, and or it was somebody's pet and stuff, and it escaped out of a vehicle when they stopped at the rest area there.
Right.
But no, it was, yeah, I remember also that walking by and seeing some of the black bears and stuff on there and hidden back in the cage and stuff. I don't like cages, and even zoos, although I have enjoyed and learned a lot by attending and going to zoos on it, but it just doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah, and I would say most people feel that way. I certainly feel that wildlife belongs in the wild, and that's part of why I do what I do, because that's where I want them to end up. Zoos really do have a great place, though, to be able to teach people and show, especially in those urban environments where you're not in Montana, you don't have wildlife at your back door. And so a lot of times people would never get the opportunity to even see a wild animal if it weren't for those places. And I think they do provide a really good source of education and sort of connecting us back to the wildlife. But, I feel like I'm lucky. I live in Montana, where I can go out just a couple miles and be able to, see wildlife. And not everybody gets that. So
Allie, how many bears do you get on average a year?
So it really varies. We at one point had a situation when we've had bad bear years and things like that, where we get quite a few orphans. And when I first started, I think we had 28. But that number we've actually reduced. So we are keeping it to 18 maximum at one time. And right now we only have 2. So
and how long before they can be released typically?
So we like to release them in the fall. before they hit their 1 year mark in February. And most of the time that is possible. We do have some exceptions where if they've, we had a bear come in actually last January that was, 30 pounds and sort of a failure to thrive situation where we will hold them over in terms of that. But for the most part, we make sure that they're fat and happy and back out before they hit 1 year old.
So that brings up a follow-up question.
Mhm.
How good are they at finding hibernation spots quickly? Like if you're releasing them in the fall, can they find a spot quick enough?
They actually do. So they've done some studies on it. They had bears that were rehabilitated and then released in the fall, and they had them collared and could see where they were going and what they were doing. And they actually made artificial dens that they would put them in. And then they found that even if they put them in the artificial den, they would leave and go find their own. So we stopped making artificial dens that they weren't going to use anyway, and we let them find their own spot. So, yeah.
Do you do DNA testing or save any of the hair and stuff from the mammals or even the birds too on it, and make a catalog of the for
So
future?
only the grizzly bears have we done that for. The black bears, we aren't collecting DNA or hair samples. If there was a need for it with a research project, we would certainly be able to do that, but we aren't necessarily tracking the populations because the black bear populations are doing well, and
Yeah.
there isn't really quite that need. The birds that we released, we've started actually the last year banding every bird that we've released so that we can have an idea of what our success rate is post rehabilitation. And there is a project going on through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and with several rehabilitation centers of looking at juvenile golden eagle success. And they've actually just extended the parameters on that because they weren't getting enough sample size, where they are putting GPS trackers on the birds and seeing where they go after they've come in for rehabilitation and kind of looking at that in much more detail than just a band would do. Because I know one of the big questions is the success of juvenile golden eagles, especially after rehabilitation, because there's just not great success in juvenile golden eagles anyway. There's pretty much I believe it's 30% success rate in the wild for those young birds. So they're getting a better look at that too.
Is that study available to the public to keep up with some of it,
I don't think they've released any of that data because they're in the middle of collecting and analyzing. So I don't think that's out yet.
It'd be interesting to read about stuff on it that
I'm sure it will be once they've gotten the more samples and more birds in with the GPS bands and everything like that, and they've got more data. I'm sure that that's going to come out. There's a lot of people working on it. So, yeah.
Do you get the roadkill?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes we do. Deer and things like that. It kind of depends on how much freezer space I have available and how many animals I have on hand. So we say yes or no sometimes, but we do get some of that.
Do you end up having to buy a lot of the food for the critters, or?
So we have a contract with Costco, and they have been so amazing to us. So most of our bear food actually gets donated from Costco, which is fantastic because otherwise they would be eating us out of house and home. And then the food for the raptors, we do purchase most of that. We do have some mice on hand just in case we run out that we are breeding and can use for feed, but for the most part that we do have to buy.
Yeah.
I had a friend that once mentioned that they took their old root or chickens that didn't lay anymore to, yeah.
Oh,
Does that?
I haven't had that come through. We, you know, we could take, well, so here's part of the reason that I wouldn't necessarily take chickens is because I don't want my releasable birds of prey to say chickens are the food source that I'm going to go and eat. So I would take chickens to feed to my ambassador birds, but not anything that was going to be releasable. So that's sort of, and again, that's kind of like, well, how much freezer space do I have for something that's going to be strictly for the ambassador birds, or, you know, something that we've had a lot of things come through for people donating to us, and some of it's wonderful and we can use, and then some of it we just unfortunately can't.
Well, I can see you feeding the whole carcass to a bear or something on there, but do you feed a whole carcass like the chicken on there to one of your birds? I mean,
so yeah, I mean, we do feed whole birds out. You know, we'll obviously, in the case of a chicken, that would go for my ambassador golden eagle.
Yeah,
certainly handle a whole chicken. But and even then, you know, sometimes with those carcasses, yeah, they'll feed a bear, but we also, you know, typically with our flight barn, we'll have 6 eagles in there at a time. And so we will put out a carcass and then have them feed off of that as well. So it goes to more use than just the mammals, but it's certainly something that the bears do enjoy.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we feed all sorts of interesting stuff around here. That's kind of one of the prerequisites if you're going to volunteer, is that you have to have kind of a tough stomach.
You know, there was, this is secondhand, but Dad worked for the Nature Conservancy out in Northern California. And one of the people there was collecting mice.
Mm-hmm.
And she was looking at all of the bugs that was inside of them, the parasites and stuff on there. And she had a pet owl that she fed the de-liced mice to, or what, debugged, I guess, on it.
Yeah.
And that owl lasted, it was in the neighborhood of 15 to 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the smaller owls. I don't know what it was, but she figured that it was because that it was eating healthy food, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, that not only healthy, but consistent, right? I mean, that's one of the things with the animals in the wild, is their food sources are not provided on a twice daily basis.
Yeah, right. Or 10 times like we are now.
Right. I mean, and it's funny because some of the birds that have come from Helena, that will release them right from the wildlife center. And we've had them hang around for a while going like, hey, you know, where's my snack?
Yeah.
Before flying off, they'll definitely be there for a couple of days, kind of going like, hey, I see you walking out. Aren't you supposed to feed me? Oh yeah, they do know where their food source is.
Yeah. When I was in high school, there was some of the kestrels had a nest up in one of the trees, and they had, I can't remember now, it was either 3 or 4 young ones. And it was interesting. I would go on out after I got my homework done before I had to go to work. And I would swipe some of the folks' hamburger and set it up on one of the trestles there. And the young ones would come down and eat it, but the parents wouldn't. They didn't trust us and stuff on there. Mm-hmm. But the funny thing was that one of the young ones, its first kill was a butterfly.
Oh, yeah.
And it lit on the telephone pole, and the 2 parents were just chirping away and flopping around and stuff. Just, you know, it was a congratulatory.
Good job.
Yeah, on it. And the thing reached down, the young one reached down and grabbed took a bite out of the butterfly, and you could just see him go, yuck. I don't want any part of that. And he left and flew back up to the tree and stuff on it.
You know, it's been interesting with the grasshopper sort of boom that has happened. That has been an amazing food source for some of these wild raptors, and will come in, you know, they'll pellet up, which is basically anything that they're not going to be able to digest comes back out in a pellet. And it's not just owls that do it, but it's, you know,
Yeah.
birds. And so we'll have the raptors pellet up, and it'll be grasshoppers, you know. Whoa, well, we know what your diet was.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad my dog didn't do that.
Red-tailed hawks too, like you know, so these big birds are just getting so many calories and protein from these little grasshoppers, and they're just eating them by the tons.
Yeah,
It's been a good food source.
yeah, I wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah.
I know the smaller ones, you know, I hear and stuff out in the backyard and stuff, you can watch them on it.
Yeah.
I'll be darned. Well, and the other thing that was really funny, I don't know when it was, that the little sparrows and stuff, when you'd park your car after driving through all those grasshoppers and stuff on there, and they'd be all over the front end, they would hop around and eat those off of your car and stuff on there. And I noticed that, well, it's been about 35 years ago now on it, but I never saw that back in the 80s on it. And it was in the late 80s to early 90s on there that it seemed like they learned how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially when they're out trying to get every calorie they can find, those bugs, especially easy pickings like that, where they're just laying there. I mean, that's what a jackpot.
Yeah.
So how far away do you typically release the bears?
So they typically go back to the region that they came from. So it really depends on where they came in from. You know, if it was out in the Flathead, then they'll take them way back up out into as far back as they can get them, but in sort of the same region where they came from. Obviously, we don't want to put them, you know, in somebody's backyard. So we try and make it as far away from public as possible while still maintaining sort of their home territory.
So do rangers typically bring them in, or do people? Like,
no, so all the bears that we get our wardens bring in.
I was just curious because I know I myself wouldn't want to approach a little baby bear.
No, we really suggest, if you found a bear, that you're calling our wardens to come get it, not have yourself try and trap it and bring it in. That's, you know, even the little 8-pound guys, the tiny ones, they are so incredibly strong and they can kick your butt. Yeah.
And you always wonder where mom is on it, even though that.
Yeah. And that is one of those things where, you know, we want to make sure it's a confirmed orphaning. We don't want to be taking one that's been stashed and mom's coming back. You know, it's something where we want to make sure that this bear is truly on their own. And not just plucking them out because we think, oh, it's sad and it's by itself.
The fawns and stuff are the ones that get picked up more and brought into you that really aren't.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because we can't take them. You know, I know at the facility on Custer, they were taking fawns at that time back then, but here we're not taking any fawns. And so it's something that's been a learning curve for me to sort of navigate how to get the point through that, you know, just because you see a fawn by itself doesn't mean that it's an orphan, because they do stash them like right under people's bushes in their yards and things like that. So it's very visible to people that this animal has been put here and the mom has left. And you know, it's hard to get that across of like, the more you go and check on this, the less likely it is for the mom to come back. So you're actually prolonging the time before it's getting taken care of as you keep checking in and looking at it. And I, try to tell people it's really hard on the heart because they're absolutely adorable and think, they're so vulnerable there. But the best thing that you can do is just leave that area, leave them be, and let mom come back to them.
You would think that after almost every year, the newspaper has to put out an article about it, that after, 100 years or so, that people would start realizing and become educated to it.
And, it's always different when they're there right in front of you and that tug on the heartstrings. And then you get worried because it's been 3 hours and mom still hasn't come back, or it's been 8 hours and mom still hasn't come back. And I always go, well, how many times have you gone out and checked on it? 3 or 4. Okay, well, every time we go out, it's going to be a little bit longer before they're going to come back,
Yeah. That.
So.
I saw one. I was up hiking down the river, and that doe had just dropped, and was still wet and stuff on there, and it was a narrow creek and stuff on there, hard to stay away. But she didn't leave the little one there, and it was amazing. It was only gone maybe 45 minutes before I had to come back down, and she had gotten it on up, and they were gone on it, out of the way on it.
Yeah.
But
it's amazing how quickly the little ones can get up and move. I mean,
yeah.
Especially
when they compare to us and stuff on there, 9 months or 10 months or a year.
Yeah,
So-
it's different.
So if somebody brings in an animal and you can't take them, is there anything illegal about them taking the animal back home and trying to take care of it?
Yeah.
There-
So you're really not supposed to take wildlife species out of the wild. There are people who do have permits. There are other rehabbers in the state that have permits for specific species, but a member of the general public is not allowed.
I was just thinking of that poor little rabbit or something.
So
Or
yeah,
a
so
deer
the
baby or a fawn, I mean.
yeah, fawn certainly not. There's different levels based on the species. There, it's generally best, no matter what, to just leave them in the wild.
There's so many diseases also that people could catch.
Yep, exactly.
Handle them and stuff on there, even the rabbits and stuff on there, that you have bubonic plague, and you got all kinds of crud and stuff on there that.
And even, people go, oh, well, they don't have a disease that can transfer to me. But most of the people I know have a cat or a dog or something, another pet. And there's so many diseases that go across especially from rabbits and things like that to your dogs. And, lepto being one that I can think of. And there's, so for a lot of reasons, besides the fact that wildlife should stay in the wild, but also biosecurity hazards and diseases and things like that, it's best to just leave them be. And if you are concerned, give a call and we'll let you know, is this something that I should be worried about? Is this something that, either a rehabber like myself or a warden needs to come and take care of? I mean, we're happy to answer those kind of questions. And sometimes it is on a case-by-case basis of, yes, that's okay to leave, or no, that should go to a rehab facility, if there's one available for that species. And it can be kind of hard to tell. So.
Very, very good information.
Yeah. And we do have an on-call cell, so it's not, we're pretty much reachable all the time. So it's, happy to answer questions. And if there is ever a situation where you're like, I'm not sure, even birds that hit windows, not all of them have to come in. Sometimes they've just got a stun and they need to just rest and take care of the bit of head trauma that they have, and then they go flying off. And I have a lot of people who will bring in a bird that was stunned and unresponsive on their porch, and by the time they get it to me, it's busting out of the box. You know? And so in those cases, you know, maybe it was best to just watch it for the 5-10 minutes and then see what it does. And then there's other times where it's like, okay, yes, that really should come in because that window strike caused a sternum fracture. So in a bird, that's going to be more of like their coracoid, which is their part of their shoulder structure and kind of their clavicles area. And they can fracture that fairly easily. And that takes time to heal, and they won't be able to fly until that happens. But each one's a case by case basis. So you never quite know. So that's why I say, like, watch it for 5-10 minutes. If it flies off, then you know it was good. And if not, then we'll come get it, or you can come bring it in. And
But you probably wouldn't take songbirds, right?
we do take songbirds.
You do take songbirds. Okay.
Yep, there's a couple species that we can't take that are the invasives, because they are invasives. We can't treat them. We can humanely euthanize them, but yeah, those are, other than that, though, we can take songbirds. I've even hummingbirds. So
What is your budget like on there? Do you have to fight each year for money to help care for these animals, or how does that work? It seems
So
like-
we do have a budget that, you know, pays for me and another staff member and a lot of the overhead that needs to happen here. And then we have amazing donors, and we have organizations that help raise funds for sort of the extra stuff that we need. And just things
So-
like having that contract with Costco to, you know, subsidize the bears. That's huge.
Yeah. So who else besides Costco? What are some of the other places that fundraise and stuff on it for you folks?
Yeah, Foundation for Animals is one, and the Montana Outdoor Legacy Foundation is another, that probably the two core groups that you can donate to them and put in the donation line saying that it's for the Wildlife Center. And then it does go directly to us. So.
And so do we get any hamburgers back then from the deer, or the road?
I don't know that you'd want the hamburger back from the deer we have. I personally wouldn't eat it.
Yeah.
And I have a pretty tough stomach for things, but you know, I leave that for the bears.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions I can answer?
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much for the information. And
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm sure, I don't know, I'm sure we'll talk about it again tomorrow morning at morning chat. 'Cause we
Yeah,
always
so.
do.
It was really wonderful. What a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very
Um,
welcome.
And I too, when I first moved here like 30 years ago, one of the first places, because my parents already lived here, one of the first places they took me was the place on Custer, and I remember it. And, you know, it'd be nice if there were, especially, you know, the way the kids are learning from home nowadays, it would be really cool if there was like webcams, and that would be part of maybe the curriculum, especially with elementary schools.
I'm not sure if we could do webcams, but I do know that we can do some like Facebook Live or recorded things back there.
I mean, you know, even if the bear rips it down and, you know, chomps on it, well, that's why you don't approach a bear, kids.
Yeah, that, yes, very, very good learning opportunity. Here is the mouth coming at the camera. Yeah. No. Unfortunately, those things cost too much for want to go through that many.
That's true. Yep, that's true.
Yeah, and we are working on, you know, there is the state IT side of things that we do have to kind of watch for, as well as what we can broadcast. So that isn't a little bit of a limiting factor. But you know, we are looking, hopefully we can get that feed at least from that one bear pen back up to the education center. So
Well, we'll keep checking in with you and seeing what kind of progress is going on.
Sounds
And-
good.
And just so you all know, just so you're aware of it, coming up in the future, we've got morning chats every Tuesday and Thursday morning from 9 to 10, and that's virtual. And then we have PopKnowledge again in 2 weeks, and it's going to be on Montana's African American history. And so that's on March 3rd. And then every Tuesday we have our gentle yoga, and that's also virtual. And if any of you need our links or links to those, you can just email us at Rocky, Michelle and I. So thank you, or call us something, but thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the information on there. You folks always do a very good job and stuff,
Oh, thank you.
and spreading your knowledge around on it. I truly appreciate it.
Oh,
I
I
agree.
appreciate getting the chance to do this with you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks again.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.